Thank you so much, Sal, for joining me today. It's great to have you on Poppy and Vines Meet the Maker. I'm going to officially turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll get going with some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Sonoma County, oddly enough, or Northern California, my home, a lot of people know me as Sal. Through all my experiences of what I've been doing the last few years, I think I've embraced Salvador a lot more now. It seems a lot more appropriate, and then a lot of folks know me as Chavez now. Chavez is a nickname for Salvador's. I'm originally from born in Santa Rosa, California. Moved to Sonoma, California, like in second grade. My father took a job there as a caretaker of property, still works there. And I grew up in the town, and I have a family of two little boys, a beautiful wife, and we live in Sonoma. And we have a couple restaurants there. And then I dedicate my life to what we do as far as the company Puente Internacional, specifically with La Luna Mezcal. I'm the most involved with because we produce that in Michoacan, Mexico. So I'm back and forth all the time, 2 times a month, typically in Mexico, pre-COVID. Right now, about 1 time a month, just due to the restrictions in travel and just being cautious. And so, yeah, that's kind of a quick background, and happy to meet everyone who's on here.
Yeah. So, so I know you guys are in the restaurant industry. You guys have Picasso, originally off of, I think the original one is off of Arnold Drive. And then you guys just moved into the old, what I think it used to be like Breakaway Cafe, and then it was Mint and Liberty. And so now you guys are there, and I know you've worked in really hard in the last couple of months to make an outdoor space for you guys. And so congratulations to that.
Thank you. Thank you.
And do you guys have any other, do you also have a food truck?
We do. Yeah. Part of as it kind of is noted now, the Picasso family brands, it consists of the food truck, the 2 places. One, the original place was a cafe, small 1,500 square foot place on the west side of town that luckily built itself up and through a lot of hard work. And so we've been able to add these other components to it.
Very nice. And so, you mentioned growing up in Sonoma and your dad manages a property there. I mean, how did you find yourself in the food and beverage industry?
So originally I kind of stumbled across it. I was actually finishing school at Sonoma State. I was in my last year there, and my parents wanted to open up a business. They didn't really know what they wanted to do. And so together, we kind of came together, and it was me, my mom, and my dad at the time. And we conceptualized Picasso Cafe, really just taking what was there previous to us, which was Fellini and Eichenbaum, a small little delicatessen. And so at first we really just were that. We were more of a deli than anything. It's funny because even the story back then was the word cafe to us meant coffee, because in Spanish cafe is coffee. And but little did we know, cafe kind of implied a small eatery, somewhere where you'd get fresh meals. But really we were offering cold cut sandwiches, breakfast burritos in the morning, not a lot of home cooking. And it wasn't until I ventured off, still being a part of Picasso's, and I did a sushi restaurant in town as a partner where I really learned how to cook. I came back into the cafe. We reinvested into a full commercial kitchen. And if you guys saw the space, you'd be probably blown away with how it worked. But it was really the pivot that created us into kind of a restaurant, or really a cafe. I started making everything from scratch, all our sauces, dressings, soups, everything. And I think that really shifted us, and people really started taking notice. And that's what really developed the brand. At one point, my parents kind of branched off into, that family dynamic of business always isn't the most fluid. And so it's now, I mean, we've never had issues, I would say, but now more than ever, now that things are kind of more separate and clear, it's really easy. We're all, great together, and there's nothing to talk about. Going from the workplace to the home place and taking the work with you was becoming a huge issue. And so, the separation of powers there really was helpful. And then my wife stepped in to be kind of my partner in those places, and she really takes all the credit with everything going on now. She's doing it day to day. I'm busy every day with the spirits company, and so we work well together. I've been on a lot of boards. I was on the school board for 6 years in town, and that really, I think, helped me develop diplomacy and good leadership skills that allowed me to really mesh well with anyone that I work with. I always try to tell people I pride myself on being a good partner, whether it's a strategic partner for somebody, a mentor, or in this case, a business partner slash spiritual partner as a husband.
Yeah.
I think that's the way we were able to make it work.
That's great. That's really great and really important too.
Yeah.
So you're in the food scene, and then
Yeah.
where did the spirits kind of aspects mesh into all of that?
So I opted to take a journey back to my family's home state of Michoacan. It became evident to me that mezcal was really a growing category around 2014, 2015. But what was also very obvious is that the focus point of the mezcal category was Oaxaca. And Oaxaca is the capital of mezcal to the world, and rightfully so. But I knew our family had a history with mezcal in Michoacan, especially from a consuming standpoint, and definitely enjoyed a lot. And I was like, I want to go back. I want to try and represent that state and work in that industry. I really didn't know what I was doing, to be honest and fair. And I went back there on a flight and started looking around. And at first, my relationship in the industry was very much like a lot of people's today. I was going down there sourcing product, bringing it back up. At one point, because both my parents were born in Mexico, I became a dual citizen.
Nice.
And through my dual citizenship, I became involved in the production side. My goal was to really expand our line to represent all of the biodiversity of agave of the state of Michoacan. And so together with me and a couple other young bucks, two of which are nephews to the original guy I worked with, we started producing. We started making mezcal, and they had a history in it. They have their lineage and practice, and I was more of like the person navigating and enabling that way. Like, hey, let's work with this agave. This agave is from this region. Let's try to introduce that one. And together we've gone to different states to kind of learn what other states are doing. We've been to San Luis Potosí, Guerrero, Oaxaca, Guanajuato. We have other states to visit still, but just to really learn, and for them also to take in other practices and just kind of see what we were doing. We always found that we're open-minded and we work really well together. Coming together with concepts. Sometimes they're like, hey, I want to make this kind of ensemble. I'm like, do it. And sometimes I say, hey, how about an ensemble like this? And we do it. So it's been really cool. I never knew how immersed I would get in the world. The buyer to importer relationship at first seemed good enough. But then, it's like anything else, when you really become passionate and start falling in love, it just kind of leads the way.
Yeah. And I'm really curious. So I'm not overly familiar with mezcal. And tequila is not always my friend. And so,
Sure.
So I think have a slight aversion, to be honest. Though I know in tasting some mezcals, they obviously have a much more, I feel like, unique flavor profile.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious to know, like, is there a true difference between, like, what is the defining factor that makes a mezcal and tequila? Is it the actual, like, initial products?
So the raw material, yeah, for sure, because tequila really specifies Blue Weber agave to be the only agave they can use for production.
Okay.
So from a raw material standpoint, mezcal opens that up to all the species available to the regions for agave production, for mezcal production. In theory, just to not confuse people more, but tequila is technically a mezcal. It's a product that's made from cooking agave, and that's what mezcal is almost by definition. It's also, so then going from raw material to the next step, I think is a very important one, because mezcal, in terms of traditional mezcal and mezcal that kind of that we produce, and obviously a lot of other people do as well, but the category of artisanal mezcal or ancestral mezcal really speaks to keeping in place the practices of the earliest times of production in Mexico. So what's curious about how we produce mezcal for La Luna Mezcal is that we do it today the same way it was done in the 1600s and the 1700s, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably one of the biggest separating factors between what industrial tequila is today and what mezcal is going to be, yes, the diversity of agaves that are used. The influence of terroir, I think, is huge in mezcal because typically speaking, there's no inoculation of any yeast, and so it's only the wild yeast influencing it. I think we're seeing this a lot in what's called natural wines now.
Sure.
So, so I think that's a lot of similarities. And I always tell people, especially being from wine country, mezcal kind of shares that similarity with wine in the sense that categorically, when you have white wine or red wine, That's like the umbrella, but then under it you have Cabernet and Sauvignon and all these other ones, and those are the varietals of grapes. And in agave, it's the same thing. Mezcal being the category, and then you have different agaves that have different flavor profiles and different unique qualities to it. And so, from cooking to then fermenting in wood typically, or obscure things like cowhide or different things that are available to people, plastic tubs,
Right.
you name it, and then distillation typically is always done in a for artisanal and ancestral mezcal, and very rudimentary still that's been passed on from generation to generation.
And you had mentioned terroir, and actually that was going to be one of my questions, because you mentioned going and visiting the other states down in Mexico, and I'm sure that they each have a really unique characteristic to them, like flavor profile that they bring, versus another state, and purely based on their terroir, where their, elevation of growing or the actual soil content. And so I'm sure that that's made kind of the educational piece and exploration of it really interesting and fascinating.
Yeah, more than ever, and I think you're absolutely right. I think all those factors play such a big role, especially with agave, because agave as a raw material to base, all alcohol is created from sugar, right? So whether it's grapes and those sugars, or sugar cane or grains, you name it, right? All of these raw materials that I just mentioned typically are a year or less of time for their maturity. And so the amount of terroir they might pick up from being in a high area, et cetera, they're going to be there, right? We speak to them, we taste them, we always, we're fascinated by them. But in agave, if you think about it, like Blue Weber for tequila, it takes at least 5 years for maturity, typically speaking. So all the things that happen in a year for other raw materials take 5 years of development for this raw material. So I would say it's all of those factors you mentioned and then some. So the terroir really penetrates, I would say, the raw material a lot more than anything else. And so, yeah, all of these, whether the climate's cold, that's going to have an influence on the raw material and the fermentation, to have the altitudes. We've seen differences in whether the agave is from a higher area, from a lower area. All these factors really matter for sure.
Yeah, how interesting. And so on the day-to-day kind of operations that are happening down in Michoacan, like that is where all of that, raw materials being processed and fermentation is happening and the distillation. So all of that is taking place down in Mexico.
That's correct. And we work out of 3 vinatas. Vinatas are what Michoacan called distilleries.
Okay.
And we have 3 vinatas, and we actually, in a greater sense, speak to terroir in that sense, because what we might produce in Cotija is going to taste different than in the Parapel, but it's going to be the same mezcaleros. And we move around as a team. It's going to be the same processes, all of it, but it's going to be the climate, the microclimates, everything else that's going to. So if we do a Manto Saguayo expression in the Parapel, same exact time, maybe days of difference to Cotija, naturally speaking, they're not going to taste the same, all things being equal. And so that's what's been kind of cool about our process, is that we produce everything of our expressions, and moving around, we get to speak to those terroirs from batch to batch, which is kind of cool.
Very cool. That's really interesting. And I love that it does have that complexity and uniqueness about it. Because I think, again, people, I know that there are a lot of tequila connoisseurs and mezcal connoisseurs. And so I find it fascinating that like that kind of complexity and diversity exists in it. Cause I did not know. And I think that's really great and interesting.
It's such a pure product in the sense that, and I'm going to speak to it in 2 fashions, right? Because when you talk about tequila, the one thing that happens as well is, now that it's become industrialized, what you're going to get from that is you're going to get a diluted product. So typically it's distilled to higher proof, and like no different than gins or vodkas, you're going to find it at 40% on the shelf, right? So
sure.
Proof. But that's going to really strip down a lot of flavors that might be present at the higher ABV for tequila specifically. So I think that's something that the word dilution, I think, means more in the world of agave than it does in the world of grains or neutral grain spirits, etc. So then that's one aspect of it. The other one is there's also filtration, right? Like when you become an industrialized product, you're going to filter out whether you want it to be color, whether you want it to be flavors, or if you want smoother products. All of these things get balanced out almost, not chemically, but definitely more engineered, right? There's chemical kind of focus to it, right? There's chemistry. Whereas Mezcal, a lot of it's done artisanal, ancestral, that I'm speaking to, by feel, right? So you're gonna distill the feel, textures, flavors, layers. You're not gonna dilute down with water, so you're gonna have a lot more body to it. All of these factors, you're definitely not gonna filter, so that's gonna obviously keep everything intact. So there's nothing stripped out. So I think that from that perspective, you know, when you talk about a mezcal that might be, this is not true always, because there's some mezcal out there or other regions that produce the lower ABV because of single distillation, etc. But double distilled mezcal at like 48%, not adjusted with water, is definitely going to taste different than if you add 8% of water to get to 40, for sure.
Yeah. That's a great point. So when did La Luna officially launch?
April 1st, 2016.
Nice.
Because and it's fitting because it felt like a joke how long it took to get us to the market, right? And it was April 1st, so it's like, we've had a lot of funny things happen the start of April as a company, including this year, and we were going through a transition from distributors, and so a lot of things happened April 1st for us, so it's been kind of cool.
How fun. That's a fun like date to kind of have some like big company history kind of around.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
And what is your lineup? Is it just a single mezcal? Do you have, I think you guys have a couple, right?
Yeah, we have. So as not because of, so I'm going to answer that in two ways. In terms of depth of agaves, we have 5 agaves we work with in the state right now, a 6th one coming that we're just finding in Michoacan. But within that, we've also made ensambles. Ensambles are blends. The biggest difference between like a wine blend and our blends are that in the world of wine, typically a winemaker can pick their favorite of each varietal in terms of a finished product and say, oh, I'm going to add 50% Cabernet, 25% of whatever, Pinot. In the world of mezcal, we're doing all this beforehand. So we're putting all the agaves in the oven together. So whether it's 3 agaves, 2 agaves, all together, fermenting together, distilled together. So everything's done, in unison versus after distillation. So because of that, we have about 9 SKUs right now in terms of 750s and other expressions. Wow. But then we've also introduced smaller formats, so 50 mLs, 200 mLs, 375s, and even a liter for a product that's used a lot in cocktailing.
Nice.
And so total we have about 24 SKUs.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And if somebody wanted to purchase La Luna, can we go onto the website and do like a search queue and it'll pull up where it is within the area nearest us? Or, I know I've seen it on the shelf a couple places here in Santa Rosa.
Yeah. So Willoughby's has been a great supporter forever. Bottle Barn for sure. Jason's been a great supporter there. Sonny at Willoughby's. It sounds like hopefully we're going to be in Oliver soon, which I think will be good accessibility for people there. MD Liquors has some at some of their locations. They have 17 in the broader Northern California region.
Great.
And on our website, if you go to it, there's a shop now feature. It takes you to a third-party online site that will ship to you. Because a lot of these stores don't have all of our expressions, and typically the online platform does. Okay. So from that perspective, it's a good option.
Perfect. That's great. And this is probably going to be a hard question to answer because I'm sure you love all of your expressions, but what is kind of your like go-to when it's, when you finally have a day off, which doesn't sound often.
Yeah. So what I love sipping on, this more nostalgia for me is Bruto, not because it's become kind of a crowd favorite, but really because it speaks to where my family's from, specifically Cotija, Michoacan. That's expression my grandpa was most used to, my dad, and my great-grandfathers, etc. So from that perspective, I always kind of gravitate towards that one. There's a certain unique taste of that agave that I really like, and it really pairs well with Cotija cheese, which that was what I remembered was bite of Cotija cheese, sip of Mezcal, Bruto specifically. And then we just launched this new ensamble. It's a Manso Saguayo Chino ensamble, and it's amazing. So I'm between those two all the time. But I go through the line as often as I need to. So, it's I call it a market research all the time.
Nice.
Yeah.
And So, I mean, you've obviously been in the food and beverage space for a while now, and I'm curious to know, like, what's your favorite aspect about this industry?
People. And that's been probably the most the saddest part of the current restrictions is the lack of interaction that we can really have, from a handshake and hug to an elbow or a dap.
Yeah.
I love people. A lot of times I get critiqued by my friends because when I talk about travel, I talk about going to work, or one time we were gonna go to a bar convent in Germany, and I was like, I'll just go for 2 days. Like, well, you don't want to go sightseeing? I'm like, no, honestly, I'd prefer to go to a bar and talk to the locals or get to know, someone else in the industry from that area. I love people. I love this dynamic. I know this is through Zoom, but if we would have done this in person, it'd been better. But
Yeah.
I like conversation. I love people. I love that interaction. And so the hospitality industry is built on that. I think that's maybe why I feel like our places have been successful is typically all of our team members, they see that we don't shy away from the conversation, from like my kids always tell me, like, Dad, is that your friend? Because of the way I say hi to people. I'm like, I say hi like that to everybody. Like yeah, sure, they're my friends. Like,
Yeah.
I consider everybody that way, until you prove that you're not. But
Right.
it's something that I like passing on to them as well as our team members to say, like, look, this is how the relationship should be, and that's what I love about the industry.
Nice. Yeah, I agree. It's the camaraderie is really special
Yeah,
and unique.
that word is key one. Camaraderie. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's pivotal.
Now, you mentioned you guys are bringing on a sixth agave. I mean, do you feel like that's kind of where your limit's going to be, or are you guys always like looking to bring on more like flavors and agaves and whatnot? And like, well, do you see it just always kind of evolving?
Yeah, we're just not going to stop searching. I think that's continue to challenge ourselves, continue to search. I would love to go down as a brand that has the broadest representation of the state, and right now we do. But I know others will probably look to do the same, I'm sure, after seeing us come to market this way. But that's why we don't stop. From border to border of Michoacan, we're continuing to look. We're continuing to look and explore, and when we find something, we go for it. We want to do it.
Cool. Yeah. I'm curious to know, like, I'm sure there's probably like wild agave that hasn't been found yet. That's just like in its happy zone out in the middle of the forest in Michoacan, waiting to be found.
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% how it goes down when we're out there looking for certain agaves. We might find another one. All of these different factors. If we're out there hunting we use a lot of wood because of how we firepower our ovens as well as our stills. And so when we're out there looking for dead trees, etc., wood in general, you're going to come across agaves in a wild sense. And so the job's never done, and we're wide open to it. A lot of times you fear what you don't know, and I feel like our team does not. We want to continue to push.
Very cool. Yeah, I've seen some of your guys' videos on your Instagram page, and they look so fascinating. I just was watching one where they had taken all the leaves off of the agave and were getting ready to move it back into like the back of a truck. Thing is a beast. Yeah.
It was over 600 pounds. It was 640 pounds.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So
it's huge.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine when you do find one, you're kind of like mark your spot and like go get all your stuff and then bring it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So if somebody wanted to jump into the crazy spirits world, what advice would you give them?
Oh God. Man, I guess the only thing I would say about anything anyone ever wants is just hopefully you find a lot of love in what you do and passion and you go for it, because it's a tough industry. I don't know what to say. It seems glorious from the outside. I think that's a misrepresentation of what all the hard work is, but it's a tough one. So get ready for a uphill battle. Be challenged. Be questioned. Be resilient. And so yeah, that'd probably be it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and very true for sure.
Yeah, but we love what we do. You feel like you don't work, so from that perspective, I feel blessed.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Sal. I really appreciate it. It's been great having you on and getting to chat with you and know you a little bit more. And I look forward to when we can do it in person.
Likewise. Any other time we can do this, let's do it again. I'd love it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Perfect.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Well, we'll talk to you real soon.